My next guests are Gretchen Oltman and Vicki Bautista. Gretchen is an author, attorney, and educator. She works as an associate professor of interdisciplinary studies at Creighton University, where she leads a program for graduate students pursuing degrees in leadership. Prior to this, she was a high school English teacher. She holds a law degree from the University of Nebraska of Law, a PhD in educational studies from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and an MA in teaching from the University of Louisville. She is the author, a co-author of Violence in Student Writing, Law Meets Literature, The Supreme 15, The Themes That Bind Us, and Prepared to Chair. She regularly presents for ASCD, the Education Law Association, and the National Council for Teachers of English. Vicki Bautista is an assistant professor at Creighton University in the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies. She serves as the assistant director for the MS program in Integrative Health and Wellness. She received a BA from the University of Texas, El Paso in Health Science with a minor in Community Health and her MA from the University of Nebraska, Omaha in Health Education. She earned her EDD in Interdisciplinary Leadership at Creighton University, focusing on department chairs and well-being. Prior to working at Creighton, she was employed in a variety of health promotion settings, including nonprofit, government, and research in the high school setting. She presents regularly on the topics of leadership and well-being, self-care, and personal leadership philosophies. Welcome to the podcast, both of you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. We're so excited to be here with you today.
Well, I'm going to ask each of you to share a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out, and I'll have you start us off, Vicki.
Sure. So my example of being pulled out of the trenches is actually somebody else doing it for me as I was thinking through an example to share today. I was in a previous position where I was a contract employee, meaning each year I would sign a contract for the next 365 days. And that worked like ongoing until the one day I got the email saying, your contract is still under negotiation. Don't come back to the office until that is complete. And so that kind of rocked my world. I really loved that job. I was there early, I stayed late, I took on extra roles and responsibilities. And that really became kind of my identity, is the job that I was doing. And so when I didn't have that job anymore, I was at a crossroads of who am I? And so I like to be busy and always doing things, and not being working for a while provided me the opportunity to really get to know who I was again. I found out that I really enjoy gardening, and so we still have a garden every summer now. That's when I found out that teaching in higher education is really where my passion lays. During that time I wasn't working, I was offered an adjunct position job at the local university. And I probably would have said no before because I would have been busy working, but this gave me the opportunity to try something new. And so waiting for the phone call that the contract had been negotiated and everything was good, turned into 6 months. And during that time, I ended up finding another position here at Creighton, actually. And so it just made me realize that sometimes you need outside forces to pull you out of the trenches and to teach you those life lessons. And mine was focused around making sure that you don't forget who you are, and to make sure that your job doesn't define who you are. You can still be a wonderful employee, serving those that you work with on a daily basis in a wonderful capacity, but you still need to be respectful to yourself and spend time doing the things that bring you happiness and joy.
And I'm glad that during that period of time that you weren't working, you found a passion that you probably otherwise wouldn't have found. So, Gretchen, how about you?
Sure. Well, so you shared that I'm an attorney. So I'm a teacher and an attorney, and I've had these crossroads in my life for a while. And I went to law school after I had taught middle school for a year. I was young, I didn't have any obligations, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do it, I might as well go to law school now. So I did, and I kind of bought into the culture there. I loved teaching before I went to law school, and I kind of went to law school with the notion that I loved education law and the issues that dealt with teachers and students. But I kind of bought into that culture that you kind of fall into in law school, which is you need to find a corporate job, a job with billable hours. You need to work hard those first 10 years of your career to make partner, et cetera, et cetera. And so I graduated early from law school and took a job prior to the bar exam with the US government. And I thought, well, this is it. This is a dream job, right? It's going to be stable. It's going to always be there, et cetera, et cetera. And now looking back on it, I think of all the times the government has shut down and caused all sorts of chaos in life that I probably wouldn't have dealt well with. But sitting in what I had was basically a cubicle job. So I sat there day after day and just literally was just dying at my desk. And a few years prior to that, probably about 3 years prior to that, I had actually lost a good friend in a tragic accident. So someone who was my age, about 21, was in an accident and died. And that defined really how I wanted to live my life. When you lose someone that you're close to at 21, you realize that life is short and that you don't know when your time is coming. So you can take advantage of every moment or not. And sitting in that government office, I literally felt like I was in a trench. Like it was the most cubicle-ish building you could be in. And I just thought, life's too short. I can't do this. I can't do this for whatever reason the society and the school and whatever tells you. I have to go live my life and I have to do what I love because life is short. My life could end tomorrow just like my friends did. And so I quit my job. I took the bar exam and passed the bar exam and went back to teaching for a decade. I taught high school English and I loved every second of it and never, ever had a regret. And people would always ask me like, couldn't you be making a lot more money being a lawyer and doing law stuff? And I was like, yeah, but life's short. You got to do what you love. And I've always just lived with that mindset that I'm only going to do something that really brings joy and that allows me to serve and invest my life in others. And so it was a lesson I had to learn early. It's not how I wanted to learn the lesson, but I'm glad I learned it at such a young age to know that the rest of my life wouldn't have been wasted sitting in an office.
Yeah, there's people that sit in an office for 25, 30 years and then they realize that, you know, their passion lies somewhere else. So you did it relatively young. So thank each of you for sharing your story. So let's talk a little bit about the book that you all have written together. So it's What's Your Leadership Story? A School Leader's Guide to Aligning How You Lead with Who You Are. So I'd like to ask each of you all, we'll start off with the story of how you ended up collaborating on the book. And then we'll talk about kind of what led to the title of the book.
So the book and the topic actually stemmed from a project that I was working on with Gretchen when I was working on my doctoral degree. She was an advisor of mine and I was helping her create the capstone class for her Master's of Organizational Leadership. And we thought, wouldn't it be great if students could write their philosophy of leadership when they left the program? Like they've taken all these classes, they've studied all these theories, they have all these new concepts and ideas. How can they use this as a leader in the real world? And as we started looking around, there were no templates, formulas, real strategies that resonated with us on how to create a leadership philosophy. So we thought, why don't we just create our own process to do this? And that's really where it came from, just a collaboration when I was in graduate school.
And it was surprising to me as Vicki and I had this conversation because I came out of the classroom. I came out of the high school classroom where having a teaching philosophy was something that everybody had. So you enter your teaching career, you leave college with a teaching philosophy. And over time, you realize like, I was pretty ambitious when before I was in the classroom, like I'm going to be friends with all my students and behavior is going to be something that, I can guide and manage all the time. I'm not going to have behavior problems. And you realize like, okay, well, like real life hits you in the face and you realize that your philosophy needs to be refined over time as you experience things. And so it was shocking to me that people in other professions didn't have this guiding piece that we start teaching with. And then as we particularly began to work, we were just at a conference for higher education. We began to talk to leaders in colleges and deans, and they were reporting the same thing. They had no idea how to articulate why they became a dean or why they were in higher ed or why they took on a leadership position. And then that translated over into the K-12 arena. We started talking to those folks, many of whom were our students. And just saw this huge gap of like, why do you go from having a teaching philosophy to an even more important role of being a leader in whatever setting and not having any guiding document? You really haven't even been asked about your philosophy. You haven't even been asked to articulate what that means. So I started asking in interviews as we were interviewing staff along the way. I remember we were hiring someone just for an administrator role, and I asked in the interview, like, so what's your leadership philosophy? I just wanted to see what would happen in a real life interview. And the interviewee said, well, I'm really organized and I'm a good listener. And I thought, well, that's not a leadership style. Like, those are like good habits of work. What does that mean? And I thought, well, we really don't have a way to have people quickly tell their leadership story, what's unique about their leadership, how they make decisions, how they want to impact others. There's really no set way to do that. And yet we're moving into a society where our LinkedIn profile, our school website profiles, all of these things are so compact and limited space that people don't spend a lot of time investing in reading them either. So Vicki and I just started playing with the idea, and it's taken several iterations of kind of talking through it. But finding something that could be useful to real people was really what we wanted to do.
What I thought was most fun about the whole process was when we did our first conference, Gretchen and I were like, should we share this with other people? Do you think people outside the classroom actually care about why they lead the way they do? And we put in a proposal to a conference and got accepted. And we had really great conversation with the session attendees. And we started doing a few more presentations at different conferences. And a couple people said, well, do you have a book with this? I'd really like to, read more about it and have more content to reflect on. And we were like, yeah, maybe we should write a book. So it's really been a fun project because we started as a tool for the classroom, and it's really just evolved and grown. And as we've got to meet folks that have gone through and finished the process of writing a leadership philosophy based off of our book and understood how they use it, it's really helped us develop more strategic ways to share with folks how to use their leadership philosophy in a meaningful way.
And have each of you discovered your own leadership story while you've been writing the book? And would you all mind sharing that?
Yeah, it's actually in the book, and we have a couple versions of our leadership philosophies. As we've been working on this process throughout the years, we thought it would only be fair for us to continue to update and work through the process as we encourage those that read the book. So our book does have our full leadership philosophies in it and a couple versions of it as well to show how it's grown over time.
Yeah, it's kind of like a resume in a way that it's a living document because as you gain more experience and especially now in the past 2 years, your leadership philosophy takes a winding road, and you learn and grow.
I want to be careful here with the language we use because we're throwing kind of the word philosophy and leadership story back and forth. And really it is the philosophy. It is kind of like why you believe what you believe, how you want to carry out your life. But as we began to talk to people, it was a story. It always came from a story, whether it was a story about their first job or the first mistake they made or that they remember, or kind of like you asked, Dana, tell us about a time in the trenches. Those stories are what connect us with people. And as we began to see, philosophies can be great, but if philosophies don't connect, if they don't have meaning and kind of substance behind them from your real life. And so we found that people could write philosophies, but they'd be really ambitious and goal oriented and I'm going to lead and I'm going to change the world. And we found that if you could tell a story instead and say, well, here's where I come from, here's how I want to change my school, or here's how I want you to perceive me as a leader, or here's what you're going to see me doing every day as a leader, that changed how people interacted with it. And so it truly is finding your inner story that you can share with others to be understood, to be not miscategorized. We see especially in school leadership, we see a lot of titles that are assigned to people: superintendent, principal, instructional leader. And those titles are passed year after year to new people. And you enter those roles and there's assumptions made about who you are. If you take a new superintendency, there's assumptions in a community about how you should behave. People will assume that you're making a lot of money and that you're driving a fancy car and that,
Mhm.
you're going to come dressed in a nice suit to work every day. And if you're a principal, people begin to wonder, like, why aren't you at this event? And why aren't you at this choir concert? And how do what are you buying at the grocery store? There's just this kind of invasive nature in education that we have to kind of watch how our educational leaders live their lives as a
Mhm.
full scope. And so we thought it was interesting that if these folks could come out and tell their stories about how they grew up, what their first jobs were, what they value in life, that it really took out the misconceptions about who they might be and allowed them to personalize their own story so that people understood who they really were.
Mhm.
And that was a really powerful thing for people to be able to do.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think going back to like when I started my teaching degree program and my leadership principal licensure program, I mean, they ask you that, like, what's your teaching philosophy? What's your leadership philosophy? But when you're going into a program, you have ideas, you have goals and ambitions. But I think also asking, kind of integrating these type of questions into interviews or performance tasks even. So, because that way the interview team gets to know more about the candidate as a person, other than kind of just a number when they're asking those scripted questions.
Well, and you, Dana, you've probably been part of jobs where someone tells you what their leadership style is or how they want to be, and how they act is completely the opposite of that. So they might say, I'm going to have an open door policy. And then you go by the door like 5 times a day and there's no open door there, or, it's open door to certain conversations, but not the ones that we need to be having. So you see that if you can take away kind of that wall of who you are as a human and where you come from, that it really does help connect us better and take down some of the barriers that stand in our way at work. And it really authenticates who you are.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about leading in a school setting. So in the book, you talk about when you're leading, you don't need to lose your individual identity, because a lot of times school leaders come in, replace somebody who might have had a totally different personality than them. So you're following your own unique path as a school leader. So how do leaders who are passionate about making positive changes forge ahead in spite of pushback, or, if they're replacing somebody who, so-and-so did it this way?
Yeah, and we're going to see that even more now with with really what's anticipated to be a huge turnover in the next few years. One of our most engaging conversations we have with folks through this process is talking about their first jobs. And that seems kind of unrelated to being a principal or a superintendent, but we open that door because it allows people to go back to their beginnings. The first time they had a job where they were accountable to someone else, what kind of management style they worked under, what responsibilities they learned working in those first jobs. And so we've kind of had a lot of fun talking. So we've talked to people who started their first jobs. One of our participants was someone who started as like a piano player. He was a musician as a kid. And so his first job was playing the piano at funerals and weddings and kind of all over the place kind of thing in his community. And then he became a dean. And he talked about how he still carried that identity of playing piano, and not just the act of playing piano, but that ability of being able to transition to different settings very easily, to kind of fit in the background, not always have to have the center of attention, but to be very mindful of what was going on around him. And he said, I learned all that by playing piano at all these funerals and weddings. But it serves me now as a dean because I can be that to my teachers. I can be the person who sits in the room and just listens and observes, and I don't always have to have the stage. And so we've had a lot of fun having people kind of look through their past. We have a principal that we work with that grew up on a dairy farm. And he's known, when you talk to the other teachers at his school, they'll talk about how he's first to show up, first to clean up a mess when somebody throws up, first to serve lunch when there's nobody there to serve lunch, deliver meals during COVID, those kind of things. So he does kind of these work tasks that are well below the role of what we consider principal to be. And yet when you talk to him, he says, well, this is what life on a dairy farm was. This is how I grew up. My parents taught me. We didn't have vacations on dairy farms. This is what we did. And so that carries over into his role as a principal. He does nothing with dairy right now. There's no cows at the school, but yet he is able to use those lessons and carries them with him. And we found that to be kind of a universal human experience, that whatever that first job, kind of first setting was, that we still carry those lessons and they evolve over time, but yet we still kind of have those living within us as we lead. So we see a lot of our school leaders who have trouble identifying with the title because they're being perceived to be someone else, or people want them to act in a certain way because so-and-so behaved like that before. But if they can take down that wall and say, okay, thank you for allowing me to step into the role of Mrs. So-and-so, but here's who I am and here's what I bring to the table. You know, I grew up in this setting. Here's how my schooling was. This is what I believe and value about education. That you can really kind of maybe shift some of the outside perceptions about who you are to be understood for who you actually are.
Yeah, I think that's so important. You know, making sure that people talk about their talents and how that sets them aside from others, and you know, don't measure people up to unrealistic expectations, maybe based on, because I think a lot of time when somebody's hired into a leadership position, you know, we see their resume, we see them on paper, and we don't know them as a person really, unless there's somebody that, you know, somebody on the hiring team knows, but they, you know, a lot of the time we think they're such and such, and then getting to know them as a person and allowing them to be themselves. So important. Well, I'd like to also ask about how a leader's personal leadership philosophy can help contribute to building one's school or district vision and mission.
Well, we see this is kind of an ever-changing process, like school mission and vision, as COVID has hit, has kind of helped us to reevaluate and relook and figure out, is this what we're really doing? Is this serving our students? Is this really providing the education that we want? So what we found is that a leader who knows who they are, who knows what they value, what their mindset is, how their real life experiences play into their decision-making, can actually make more sound decisions and be more stable in their decision-making processes, which in turn allows teachers and students to feel safer, secure, and to be able to focus on the tasks that they have in front of them. So you don't have someone who's wobbling back and forth between different kind of personalities or styles. You have someone who's decisive in how they do things, whether it be allowing teachers to make their own decisions or whether they're making the decisions themselves. But we see that stance really just takes away kind of this exterior shell that we put on as leaders, and allows us to be who we are. And so we aren't pretending to be someone. We don't have to keep up appearances, but we can go in and we can stand next to a teacher and say, I can help you. And how can I help? And here's what I can offer. And what can I offer to you that can help you? And that alone kind of brings that cohesiveness of a building together.
Vicki, did you have something you'd like to add about kind of how people, you know, can articulate their core values?
You know, and throughout the book, we have different activities that help us identify what our core values are. There's lots of great resources out there. And we always like to say in our trainings, you've all been through so much professional development. You filled out all sorts of surveys and assessments. Just going back to those things, pulling them out of the files or going through your emails and looking through them again can really help you identify what's important to you as a leader, what your values are. And so using the tools that you already have is super important as you think through what your values are. But if you know what your values are, like Gretchen had mentioned, it makes it easier to make decisions if you always think back to those things. They also help you stay consistent with your thought process over time as well. So spending the time to think through core values, I would say, is an important part of when you're crafting your leadership story or philosophy.
Yeah, and also maybe keeping a journal, some type of a leadership journal, and also, you know, getting in groups such as masterminds with like-minded leaders, I think helps a lot. I think a lot of leaders up until recently have not used those tools, and, you know, they often feel like they're isolated.
And you mentioned lots of strategies that we talk about too in our presentations and in the book as well. sharing your leadership philosophy with others, having a circle of those that you trust review it and ask them, does this actually demonstrate who I am as a person? Posting it somewhere that you can see it on a daily basis, or at least where you can see it if you're making a challenging situation. Sharing it with, like you mentioned, maybe if you're in a new role in a position, or if you're starting a new committee, it's a great way to break the ice and let everybody share who they are too. Gretchen and I also have a notion that we believe everybody is a leader. And so we think that it's important for everybody on all the teams in the building to think about what their leadership philosophy is and know what their values are as well.
So we're facing a hiring season this spring where a lot of people might be asked to apply to positions to replace those who are burnt out, because there will be a large turnover amongst district leaders and building leaders. So what is an example of what you would call an accidental leader, and how are we going to be prepared for those people to replace the ones who are leaving?
Well, up to this point, and I think we'll probably see that more, we're going to see more accidental leaders happen. These are just, this is a term we came up with as we talked to folks about how they became leaders in education. And we got such a variety of answers from folks, whether it was, well, I was the only person who applied for a position, or I was really good teacher in the classroom, and so it was natural for my district to come to me and think I would be a good leader. And sometimes that doesn't work out. We've had examples where someone was like the only person in a faculty office to answer the phone the day that HR called looking for a department chair. And that's just an accident. You answer the phone and suddenly you're the department chair and you're like, oh, great, I didn't even want this job. And so I think we're going to see more of that, where people are tasked with leadership responsibilities. One of the things that we think will help this is by embracing that notion that everyone is a leader. If we do that in education, and that is school-wide, that is from the cafeteria staff to the custodial staff to the counselors to the school nurse, everyone is making leadership decisions on behalf of the school. And so we need to prepare and arm those folks with the knowledge about how to make ethical and sound decisions, and to allow them to make decisions that we then support. I was talking to a school nurse lately who said, I never thought of myself as a leader. And yet here she is on the front lines, taking in students who are not only having issues with COVID, but also having issues with eating disorders, with strife at home, violence at home, abusive issues, those kind of things. And I thought, you are making some of the most important decisions in the school, because you're handling these one-on-one, you're taking in this information, you're having to make decisions about who do I call, who do I let know, what do I say to the student in front of me? We have to empower everyone within the school to feel like a leader, to know that their decisions will be supported, and to know that we also see them as leaders, that we see our teachers as leaders. Oftentimes you hear teachers say, well, I'm just a third grade teacher. Like, that's what I do. It's like, oh, you are so much more than a third grade teacher. You are guiding the reading habits of our students. You are leading these families through this difficult time. You are making decisions about how and when and where their student will learn and participate, and how they will grow through this process. You are one of those most vital leaders. You are the leader in that classroom. And if we can help our students, or help our teachers to understand this, I think that we'll be more apt to bring up a rank of people who will step into leadership roles more willingly, and maybe even more skilled. That it won't be because their skill was answering the phone on a certain day. It will be because they've actually practiced some leadership habits and skills within their own work setting, to then be able to transition those to other settings in the school. And I think we're going to see that. We're going to be called on to be able to exercise leadership out of our own classroom, certainly. I was just reading an article about a neighborhood district somewhere that they had called local churches. They had such a sub shortage that they called local churches to try to find subs. And suddenly they had an influx of 100 or so subs. And I thought, well, isn't that an interesting thing? We're making connections outside of the classroom and outside of our schools. And we're asking people to lead in ways they've never had before. And one of those ways is being a substitute teacher. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. But the more that we as schools can provide those tools, the more apt we are to see those replicated in our setting and be able to welcome more into our school and be able to transition between role to role to exercise leadership in whatever setting it is that we're called to.
Yeah, I think those are great points, because we don't often think of like the work that the custodian does or the school nurse and the decisions that they make, and partnering with those people in the building when you're a building leader or on the leadership team to help with students. I remember doing alternatives to suspension as a dean of student, and working with the custodians on, let's have kids scrape that gum off of the bottom of the tables, right?
Oh, and as a parent, I've never heard so many people complain about the tone of voice of a school secretary. And I just think like the lady's like answering the phone and she's taking attendance, like she's got to have at least 50 jobs going on at one time when she answers the phone. But yet here we are as parents on the outside are saying like, well, I didn't like the tone of that person. I thought, well, oh my goodness, like, that person is making so many decisions right now about who's going where, what time, what, managing so much and making decisions on behalf of that school that we can't underestimate what is going on.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out. And also just kind of a important piece to remember is also to encourage just people to seek out more leadership, whether it be part of a team lead, a department chair, or moving into a different type of position like a curriculum coordinator or instructional coach. Because there are a lot of people who don't see the leadership potential in themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely. I've worked with student teachers. I see that they'll either say things like, well, I'll never, I'm always going to be a third grade teacher, or like, I'd never be considered for a school principal job. Like, what are you talking about? It's like, no, you actually could be. You're not only are you a good teacher, but you have sound decision making and you're personable and you have the skill set that would be a great leader. And if you can kind of help them to see that along the way, I think you're absolutely right that finding that ability to have people reflect on their own skill sets and their own abilities is really important in our career.
I wanted to ask you all about some workshops that are upcoming. So you said, so we have the ASCD conference coming up in Chicago, I think March 18th through 21st, something like that. So you all are doing a after conference workshop. So tell me a little bit about that.
We're super excited to be collaborating with ASCD affiliate members for this online learning experience. Gretchen and I are going to get to be able to walk individuals through crafting their leadership philosophy. It'll be a fun and engaging time doing some of the assessments to determine what core values are, what your mindset is, what your leadership style is, and how those all play into crafting your leadership story. So we're excited to be collaborating. We'll share that link with you so you can share it with your listeners as well.
Great.
One of the things we find about this process is we have a book and you can sit on your couch and do it over the weekend and it's fine. What we found is the value is doing it with other people. And so if you can get your PLC together, if you can get your leadership team together, even if it's just a group of friends from different schools in different states, we found that the value is being able to hear these stories and hear what other people's stories are like. And oftentimes you get this look of surprise, like, I didn't know that about you. And I didn't know that you felt that way, but it's really kind of exciting. And I think this is one of those things where we get to do that, where we'll have a time to interact with people that are working through the process and are revising and thinking about their leadership stories, but also get to interact with others to think about, like, is that really how I want to say it? Does that really reflect who I am? And so the value of this is that you get some real feedback from real people in real time. And we're just here along the way to help support that process. Vicki and I are really, what we've done in a lot of our things is to ask participants who go through this process with us to send us their leadership stories, and then we help them kind of work through iterations of that. That's exactly what these workshop pieces allow you to do. You'll get a free copy of the book to work through, and then we're going to be there along the way with you to help lead you and the other colleagues that are with you through the process. So we're really excited about being able to do some person-to-person interaction on this process.
Yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity to brainstorm. And I can think there are a lot of people that probably have not done something similar. So kind of reevaluating where what your story is.
Yeah, what we find too is folks that do this process with us, they tend to know why they lead the way they do, but they've never had the dedicated space or time to think through and write it and articulate it. So most really like the time to think through all of their experiences and really find a way to express who they are as a leader in the written format. But it's also a good way, for elevator speeches too, to know who you are as a leader for those that are seeking leadership positions.
Yeah, we have a lot of people who come to these sessions and tell us that it's kind of a luxury. Oh, I got to get away from the sessions on data and accountability and assessment. And this is just one for me. As a school leader, I get to think about my own processes and practices, and I get to reflect on that and what it means to me and who I want to be. And if I'm really doing what I meant to do when I stepped into this role. And so we hope that it's a luxury that many people can take part in. I wish it had more amenities to it, like, I don't know, fancy bathrobes and champagne and stuff, but it doesn't. So we'll just make it as fun as it can be. But we definitely think the time is well spent invested in our school leaders today. Absolutely.
Well, as we wrap up the podcast today, I wanted to ask each of you, out of everything we talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember? We'll start with you, Vicki.
Yep. I really like the concept that everybody is a leader. As a parent that interacts with K through 12 frequently, the teachers and the front office and the nurse are generally the folks that I work with. And so remembering that they're leaders and empowering them is very important.
How about you, Gretchen?
Oh, I like the notion that everybody has a story. And so when I think when I was younger, there used to be a segment on CBS News where a guy would throw a dart at a map, a reporter would throw a dart at a map and go to that place, open the phone book, find a person in the phone book and go meet that person. And they ended up being the most interesting, intriguing stories that just came out of the blue, literally out of the dart to the phone book to the picking the person. And that taught me at the time, everybody does have a story. And when you get the time to talk about it and really invest in other people, you start learning those stories and you start figuring out that people aren't their position. They aren't the facades that they put up around them, but they're humans with real attributes and really kind of traits that you wish you knew more about, that you wish you could take part in more and know more people in that way. I read of some sort of networker recently that said one of their best icebreakers questions is to say, hey, what's your story? And I thought, well, isn't that an interesting way to just meet somebody at a party or at an event, is be like, hey, what's your story, and see what they say. And I think that really opens the idea that it's not, you're not your role, you're not your degrees, you're not your salary. You have a story to you. And the more that we can understand that, the more that we can appreciate each other as humans. And I think in today's world, I think that's what we need a little bit more of, is just knowing that everybody's story is unique, but everybody's story is valued.
Yeah, that's so important to remember. Well, where can people connect with you and find you online?
Vicki and I are both on Twitter, and we're both on LinkedIn. So we are available to chat through both of those venues by just looking up our names. And certainly our emails are connected to those as well. So we'd love to chat with any of your listeners about this process, about more resources, about what kind of goes into this process, even about revising their own leadership story. If they're working on it on their own or in a team, share with us what you're doing. We found this to be one of our best invitations to the world, is we ask you to share with us what you've done so that we can see how this is impacting schools around the world, or around the country at least. And I think that's what we'd really like to have part of.
Yeah, and I think that's a great invitation for people to, think about their stories, right? We don't always sit down and do that. So thank you all for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast today. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much.